listening, squirrels? My stomach's kind of ick, so I'm not sure how long I'll be able to read, but I'll do it as long as I can. Tommy felt a small hand thrust into his. Beside him stood Annette. She pointed up at a rickety ladder that apparently led to some attics. "Quick, up here!" She dragged him after her up the ladder. Did I read? Let's see what was before this. Yeah, he had. Tommy brought the picture down with a terrific force on he got number 14, that guy number 14, instead of getting Conrad. For a moment, Tommy hesitated. There was a sound of someone stirring on the floor below. Then the German's voice came up the stairs. "Got him, Himmel? Conrad, what is it?" And then Tommy felt a small hand thrust into his. Beside him stood Annette. She pointed up at a rickety ladder that apparently led to some attics. "Quick, up here!" She dragged him after her up the ladder. In another moment they were standing in a dusty garret littered with lumber. Tommy looked round. "This won't do. It's a regular trap. There's no way out. Hush, wait." The girl put her finger to her lips. She crept to the top of the ladder and listened. The banging and beating on the door was terrific. The German and another were trying to force the door in. Annette explained in a whisper. "They will think you're still inside. They cannot hear what Conrad says. The door is too thick." "I thought you could hear what went on in the room." "There is a peephole into the next room. It was clever of you to guess, but they will not think of that. They are only anxious to get in." "Yes, but look here." "Leave it to me." She bent down. To his amazement, Tommy saw that she was fastening the end of a long piece of string to the handle of a big cracked jug. She arranged it carefully, then turned to Tommy. "Have you the key of the door?" "Yes." "Give it to me." He handed it to her. "I'm going down. Do you think you can go halfway and then swing around down behind the ladder so that they will not see you?" Tommy nodded. "There's a big cupboard in the shadow of the landing. Stand behind it. Take the end of the string in your hand. When I've let the others out, pull." Before he had time to ask her anything more, she had flitted lightly down the ladder and was in the midst of the group with a loud cry. "Mon Dieu, mon Dieu!" Something in French. The German turned on her with an oath. "Get out of this. Go to your room." Very cautiously, Tommy swung himself down the back of the ladder. So long as they did not turn round, all was well. He crouched behind the cupboard. They were still between him and the stairs. Annette appeared to stumble over something. She stooped. "Mon Dieu!" Something in French. The German snatched it from her. He unlocked the door. Conrad stumbled out, swearing. "Where is he? Have you got him?" "We've seen no one," said the German sharply. His face paled. "Well, who do you mean?" Conrad gave vent to another oath. "He's got away." "Impossible. He would have passed us." At that moment, with an ecstatic smile, Tommy pulled the string. A crash of crockery came from the attic above. In a trice, the men were pushing each other up the rickety ladder and had disappeared into the darkness above. Quick as a flash, Tommy leapt from his hiding place and dashed down the stairs, pulling the girl with him. There was no one in the hall. He fumbled over the bolts and chain. At last they yielded. The door swung open. He turned. Annette had disappeared. Tommy stood spellbound. Had she run upstairs again? What madness possessed her? He fumed with impatience, but he stood his ground. He would not go. He would not go without her. The dummy. And suddenly there was an outcry overhead, an exclamation from the German, and then Annette's voice, clear and high. Something. "He has escaped, and quickly. Who would have thought it?" Tommy stood still stood rooted to the ground. Was that a command to him to go? He fancied it was. And then, louder still, the words floated down to him. This is a terrible house. I want to go back to Marguerite, to Marguerite, to Marguerite. Tommy had run back to the stairs. She wanted him to go and leave her, but why? At all costs, he must try and get her away with him. Then his heart sank. Conrad was leaping down the stairs, uttering a savage cry at the sight of him. After him came the others. Tommy stopped Conrad's rush with a straight blow with his fist. It caught the other on the point of the jaw, and he fell like a log. The second man tripped over his body and fell. From higher up the staircase there was a flash, and a bullet grazed Tommy's ear. He realized that it would be good for his health to get out of this house as soon as possible. As regards Annette, he could do nothing. He had got even with Conrad, which was one satisfaction. The blow had been a good one. He leapt for the door, slamming it behind him. The square was deserted. In front of the house was a baker's van. Evidently, he was to have taken out of London. He was to have been taken out of London in that. And his body found many miles from the house in Soho. The driver jumped to the pavement and tried to bar Tommy's way. Again, Tommy's first fist shot out, and the driver sprawled on the pavement. Tommy must have one heck of a fist. Tommy took to his heels and ran. None too soon the front door opened, and a hail of bullets followed him. Fortunately, none of them hit him. He turned the corner to the square. There's one thing, he thought to himself, they can't go on shooting. They'll have the police after them if they do. I wonder they dared to there. He heard the footsteps of his pursuers behind him and redoubled his own pace. Once he got out of these byways, he would be safe. There would be policemen about somewhere, not that he really wanted to invoke the aid of the police. If he could possibly do without it, it meant explanations and general awkwardness. In another moment he had reasons to bless his luck. He stumbled over a prostrate figure which started up with a yell of alarm and dashed off down the street. Tommy drew back into a doorway. In a minute he had the pleasure of seeing his two pursuers, of whom the German was one, industriously tracking down the red herring. Tommy sat down quietly on the doorstep and allowed a few moments to elapse while he recovered his breath. Then he strolled gently in the opposite direction. He glanced at his watch. It was a little after 5:30. It was rapidly growing light. At the next corner he passed a policeman. The policeman cast a suspicious eye on him. Tommy felt slightly offended. Then, passing his hand over his face, he laughed. He had not shaved or washed for 3 days. What a guy he must look. He betook himself without more ado to a Turkish bath establishment which he knew to be open all night. He emerged into the busy daylight, feeling himself once more able to make plans. First of all, he must have a square meal. He had eaten nothing since midday yesterday. He turned into an ABC shop and ordered eggs and bacon and coffee. ABC? He's eating? Must be different. Whilst he ate, he read a morning paper propped up in front of him. Suddenly he stiffened. There was a long article on Kremenin, who was described as a man behind Bolshevism in Russia and who had just arrived in London. Some thought as an unofficial envoy. His career was sketched lightly, and it was firmly asserted that he, and not the figurehead leaders, had been the author of the Russian Revolution. In the center of the page was his portrait. So that's who number one is, said Tommy, with his mouth full of eggs and bacon. Not a doubt about it. I must push on. He paid for his breakfast and betook himself to Whitehall. There he sent up his name and the message that it was urgent. A few minutes later he was in the presence of the man who did not go by the name of Mr. Carter. Who did not... Wait a minute. A few minutes later he was in the presence of the man who did not here go by the name of Mr. Carter. There was a frown on his face. Look here, you've no business to come asking for me in this way. I thought that was distinctly understood. It was, sir, but I judged it important to lose no time. And as briefly and succinctly as possible he detailed the experiences of the last few days. Halfway through, Mr. Carter interrupted him to give him a few cryptic orders through the telephone. All traces of displeasure had now left his face. He nodded energetically when Tommy had finished. Quite right. Every moment's of value. Fear we shall be too late anyway. They wouldn't wait, would clear out at once. Still, they may have left something behind them that will be a clue. You say you've recognized number one to be a criminal? Kramenin. That's important. We want something against him badly to prevent the cabinet falling on his neck too freely. What about the others? You say two faces were familiar to you? One's a labor man, you think? Just look through these photos and see if you can spot him. A minute later, Tommy held one up. Mr. Carter exhibited some surprise. Westway. Shouldn't have thought it. Poses as being moderate. As for the other fellow, I think I can give a good guess. He handed another photograph to Tommy and smiled at the other's exclamation. I'm right then? Who is he? Irishman. Prominent Unionist MP, all a blind, of course. We've suspected it, but couldn't get any proof. Yes, you've done very well, young man. The 29th, you say, is the date. That gives us very little time. Very little time indeed. But, Tommy hesitated. Mr. Carter read his thoughts. We can deal with the general strike menace, I think. It's a toss-up, but we've got a sporting chance. But if that draft treaty turns up, we're done. England will be plunged in anarchy. Oh, what's that? The car? Come on, Beresford, we'll go and have a look at this house of yours. 2 constables were on duty in front of the house in Soho. An inspector reported to Mr. Carter in a low voice. The latter turned to Tommy. The birds have flown, as we thought. We might as well go over it. Going over the deserted house seemed to Tommy to partake of the character of a dream. Everything was just as it had been. The prison room with the crooked pictures, the broken jug in the attic, the meeting room with its long table. But nowhere was there a trace of papers. Everything of that kind had either been destroyed or taken away, and there was no sign of Annette. What you tell me about the girl puzzled me, said Mr. Carter. You believe that she deliberately went back? It would seem so, sir. She ran upstairs while I was getting the door open. She must belong to the gang then, but being a woman didn't feel like standing by to see a personable young man killed. But evidently she's in with them or she wouldn't have gone back. I can't believe she's really one of them, sir. She seems so different. Good looking, I suppose, said Mr. Carter with a smile that made Tommy flush to the roots of his hair. He admitted Annette's beauty rather shamefacedly. By the way, observed Mr. Carter, have you shown yourself to Miss Tuppence yet? She's been bombarding me with letters about you. Tuppence, I was afraid she might get rattled. Did she go to the police? Mr. Carter shook his head. Then I wonder how they twigged me. Mr. Carter looked inquiringly at him, and Tommy explained. The other nodded thoroughly. True, that's rather a curious point, unless the mention of the writs was an accidental remark. It might have been, sir, but they must have found out about me suddenly in some way. Well, said Mr. Carter, looking round him, there's nothing more to be done here. What about some lunch with me? Thanks awfully, sir, but I think I'd better get back and rout out Tuppence. Of course, give her my kind regards and tell her not to believe you're killed too readily next time. Tommy grinned. I take a lot of killing, sir. So I perceive, said Mr. Carter dryly. Well, goodbye. Remember, you're a marked man now, and take reasonably good care of yourself. Thank you, sir. Hailing a taxi briskly, Tommy stepped in and was swiftly borne to the Ritz, dwelling the while on the pleasurable anticipation of startling Tuppence. Wonder what she's been up to, dogging Rita most likely. By the way, I suppose that's who Annette meant by Marguerite. I didn't get it at the time. The thought saddened him a little, for it seemed to prove that Mrs. Vandermeyer and the girl were on intimate terms. The taxi drew up at the Ritz. Tommy burst into its sacred portals eagerly, but his enthusiasm received a check. He was informed that Miss Cowley had gone out a quarter of an hour ago. And that's all of that. And then we'll be on chapter 18 whenever I can read next. Hopefully tomorrow, the telegram. Alright. Have a happy night. It's almost gone. Let's hope I can sleep good tonight. Love y'all. Be sweet, don't be ugly. Bye-bye.